I am Jim Collison and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called the Coach, recorded on May 24th, 2019. Called the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions during this live webcast, we do have a chat room that's available for you. Head out to coaching.gallup.com/live. That is our live page, at least for now. And on the link below the video is a link to the YouTube page that has a chat room embedded in it. A bunch of you have made it into that, and you can answer your questions there. If you're listening to the recorded version, listening after the fact, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. And, of course, don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. Just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your Clifton Strengths coaching resources and training needs. Easier to say. You can also catch the video in both streaming and downloadable audio for offline listening. We call that podcasting. All the cool kids are doing it. You want to do, all the millennials are doing it. You want to do that as well. Get available on any podcast player, both iPhone and Android have their own, or there's a bunch you can just use your favorite one. Search Gallup podcasts or in any of those directories and get us downloaded. Mike McDonald is our host today. Of course, Mike is a senior workplace consultant with Gallup here on the riverfront. Mike, you're looking great today. Welcome to Called the Coach.
I'm trying to bring the spring, Jim. We've earned it. We worked for it, and I don't care what the weather actually tells us. I'm going to bring the spring. So,
well, I appreciate that. We have a millennial with us today, which means we've amped up the production of our webcast today. So, right. Super excited about that. Why don't you introduce her and let's get started?
I would love to. So everyone, thanks for joining in. I have the privilege, benefit, and luxury of introducing my friend, Casandra Fritzsche. And I have been able to work with Casandra for the past few years, and really excited to have her join us because of two reasons. One is she singularly represents this topic perfectly as a millennial. So we thought we'd bring in somebody that could speak to it with first-person reference, which Jim and I clearly cannot. And secondly, she is so smart, so consultative, has such a mastery of engagement, strengths, all of Gallup's best practices, that the integration of her personal experience with her professional delivery and who she is as a learning and development consultant is going to bring a ton of value to this discussion today. So there is absolutely a reason why we've had each and every one of these guests who represent the best of our learning content, our reports, our position papers, and Casandra is exactly that person for the Millennial Report. So Casandra, that's a strong intro. You deserve every bit of it. But it sets expectations for all of us, right? So Casandra, in all genuine sincerity, though, it's really great to have you join all of us. I think the millennial topic, while it's not completely new, I don't think it's completely been uncovered. I don't think it's completely been explored. I think there's still a lot to put into motion, particularly as we're on now the tipping point of the millennial overtake of the workplace. And one of the central data points that we pay attention to that really leads us on into our discussion is the fact that next year, 2020, 70% of the workplace will be categorically millennial. So welcome. Oh. We are welcome to your world. Yeah. So.
Yes. Welcome to my world. Thank you.
Great to have us. Yeah. Great to have us join. Jim, we went from being a majority to a minority like that in 1 year. So here we are. But gang, as you're keeping track at home, we're going to walk through our same 4 data point outline. And our call to action really around all of this is that we want to convert our content of our research to great coaching and consulting. And so that's really the pressure point that each of these conversations really represent as we feature these guests who feature these reports is how do we convert all of that to the best practice advice and coaching that we can provide. So the 4 data points we're going to operate from as we build out these chapters of today's particular book. The first one, if you're writing these down, the first one is 53%. The second is 71%. The third data point is 68%. And the fourth data point is 32%. And we're going to tell our story through those 4 data points, 53, 71, 68, and 32%. So with that, we will dive right in. So Casandra, 53%. We just had a conversation in our previous report. We featured Ella Washington.
Okay.
Who talked a lot about her central premises is our report around diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And millennials have a strong story to tell us and a lesson to teach us around diversity and inclusion, because that first data point, 53%, represents the fact that 53% of millennials identify as non-white. Now, gang, as we think about the evolution of what that number represents, our traditionalist generation identified only 15% themselves as non-white. So all of a sudden, the world and the workplace intersect in a way that looks very, very different. But Casandra, help us understand, what does that actually mean? Like that's so 53% now non-white.
Yep.
Why and how does that matter in your perspective?
I love that question. I think if you start to break this down into real life, it means the workplaces are looking different. It means your teams look different. And it also just gives you a massive opportunity to better represent the world. I think that's the really exciting thing about being a millennial and being a representation, thinking about all of these numbers. The other thing I think that is really represented by this number is the fact that the millennial generation is probably more of a bridge in these numbers than anything else. If you look at Gen Z, the ones that are younger than us, think about what that means for the entire fabric of society in the United States. How are we going to start working with more and more people to have better represented workplaces, to have better represented teams? And I think this is a great opportunity to use strengths to better understand not only the personalities, but the needs of our workers on a day-to-day basis for retention, for engagement.
I love it. I love it. What's the evidence, Casandra, that either from research or in your own experience that you're seeing conversations, talent attraction, talent development, talent engagement? Where's the outcomes that you're seeing as we think about who millennials are and what they represent in this notion of diversity and inclusion?
So, in terms of, will you repeat that for me one more time?
Yeah, where are you seeing that actually matter? Like in a performance or a team's ability to do things better or differently than they've been able to do them before, as we integrate the reality that a 53% are non-white. How is that how are differences an advantage in the reality of that shift in population?
Great. Yeah, I love the phrase differences are advantages.
Okay.
So I'm thinking a lot about millennials, and I'm thinking about employee retention as one of the first things. And millennials are really consumers of the global workforce.
Okay.
So when I think about that, I'm thinking about being able to see organizations. I'm thinking about being able to see opportunities. So one of the cool things about organizations that are responding to the fact that our teams need to be more diverse, our teams need to have a more representative makeup, these are probably really innovative organizations that are attracting top talent. This is also the most highly educated generation. So organizations that make a conscious effort, not just a piece of paper check mark, I'm doing inclusion and diversity because I have to. The ones that are actually taking this seriously are probably the organizations that are attracting those top talented millennials.
I just wrote that down. I think that's, Jim, I think we have a headline that just jumped right off the page here. Millennials are consumers of the global, and I even kind of amended it, Casandra.
Yeah.
Millennials are consumers of the global workplace and the global marketplace, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So those have to integrate themselves accordingly. No, that's terrific. Thanks for taking us in. So we've got that first data point and context under our belt. Let's move into this next conversation piece. So 71% is our next point of reference. And team 71% represents the fact that 71% of millennials who strongly agree that they know what their organization stands for and what makes it different from its competitors plan to stay with their company for at least 1 year. Okay. So I'm going to repeat that. 71% of millennials who strongly agree that they know what their organization stands for and what makes it different from its competitors plan to stay with their company for at least 1 year. Now, the contrast of that is that only 26%, unfortunately, can say that they've actually heard somebody talk about how their work connects to mission and purpose. So we have a desire and a need, a want perhaps, that's going unmet in the gap between those two data points. Casandra, take us inside that conversation. How do we build the bridge there in the mind and space of a millennial, and what does coaching and strengths contribute to that?
Ah, fantastic. I think of this part as the purpose gap. I think a lot of your millennials, a lot of people, and we define millennials as those born from 1980 to 1996. So perhaps those of you who weren't originally identifying as a millennial, born in 1982, you're part of us now. Welcome. But a lot of us who were raised in this generation were the ones who were told to find a career that you care about, find one you have passion for. And because of that, we're looking for those jobs. We're looking for jobs that are more than just a paycheck you get on a biweekly, weekly basis. What companies are failing to do is articulate that purpose. So really strong companies have a good mission statement, and not just a mission statement that's on a website, a mission statement that I could ask you, Mike, or you, Jim, and you'd both be able to tell me something really powerful. The real miss here is aligning that purpose to the day-to-day roles and responsibilities. So as a company, when you're able to do that, you're probably able to retain more of these employees. We're known as the job hopping generation, perhaps for a reason. But when you are able to do this type of thing, you're significantly more likely to actually retain these really top talented employees who are willing to devote a whole lot of their lives to your mission.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Casandra, we didn't, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'd love for you to share just a little bit of your own personal story, as much as you're comfortable with. And so just so you all know, Casandra came to Gallup with an incredibly mission-rich history and career behind her, that she was successful at every turn, but a representative core of purpose and mission in her own experience is one that really stuck out, even for us here at Gallup as she came on board. And Casandra, I'd love to have you, just to whatever points of reference are meaningful in your own journey, where has purpose and mission been a role, or played a role in your decision making as you've said yes to a series of very successful career steps in your own life?
Yeah, I'm kind of a stereotypical millennial, I guess, when it comes to this. And first of all, I don't want millennial to be a bad word, so I hope people are starting to realign that. I started my career off in nonprofits. So this was actually the first organization I ever worked for that wasn't a nonprofit. I started off right out of graduate school. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. Following that, I joined a international nonprofit. I spent about 5 years of my life traveling a whole lot, working in disaster relief, international humanitarian service. I lived in Southeast Asia for a few years. My life was really devoted to purpose. I took a lot of really intentional career choices that were not by any means high-paying careers. I'm sure that I have other people who worked for a nonprofit who know how that feels, because it was all purpose. It was doing a job that I was really passionate about and feeling like I was making an impact. So coming on to Gallup, it was really fun. One of the first questions that was asked to me was, how do you feel like you're going to make that transition? And I think I'm really lucky, and not saying this just because of the people on this call, that I have excellent people that I work with, excellent managers, people that I can talk to who really instill that sense of purpose on a day-to-day basis, including my team members. So it doesn't necessarily feel like this big shift, even if you don't have the normal mission-heavy centric vision that nonprofits do. Gallup has really given me that too.
I love it. Yeah. I think we all try to live vicariously, quite frankly, through the life that you've had already, Cassandra, because in the pursuit of that mission and purpose, a lot of adventure, and consistent with what you started off telling us about with the millennials, you've seen so much of the world and have a global perspective, as you referenced global marketplace and global workplace. You've had a pretty fair amount of experience with that already. Certainly something to stand on as you make sense out of the rest of your career. So,
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. I think that's a great representation of exactly what we're talking about, because qualitatively, that story really helps us catch exactly that decision-making threshold, right? Where are the choices being said yes to? Where have they been said no to? Yeah. And most importantly, why? Now, Casandra, would you share with us your top 5 strengths?
I would love to. Okay. I am input, positivity, futuristic, strategic, and learner.
Okay. So again, I want to hone in on this strengths explanation behind motivation, behind millennial.
Sure.
Where for you did those 5 strengths explain and support purpose or mission as you've leveraged them or made sense out of your career journey?
I love that question. And I think that's a great coaching question for coaches on the call.
Okay.
Mine has probably, if I were thinking about my strengths and zoning in on the one that really impacts this, it's probably futuristic. And I think in a lot of ways, futuristic can play a similar role to significance in thinking about the decision-making process and thinking about what you want reflected in your life choices. So when I've thought about my future, I know I want a future that I can be proud of, or I can look back on and say that was the correct decision. And I think for a lot of people my age, that doesn't necessarily always just encompass the rational economics. A lot of it's the behavioral economics we talk about so often in class. It's the decisions that are supported by feelings, the decisions supported by feeling like you've had an impact not only maybe on your immediate community, but on a larger scale. So I think the larger purpose part is really where my futuristic starts to pop in.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think that's just an important connection, right, that we have the opportunity to make, that if that's a value, it is for all of us, but certainly the millennials are standard bearers, I think, in terms of really demanding that be a portion and a centerpiece to their career and what purpose looks like for them. I think we have an opportunity, right, to, with intentionality, connect the strength support to what our mission can and should be aspirationally, but actually as well. So that's a great story. So let's keep unpacking this then. So our third data point that comes into our windshield here is this 68%. And the conversation that provokes is the fact that that data point tells us that 68% of millennials who strongly agree that they have had opportunities at work to learn and grow in the past year plan to be with their organization 1 year from now. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. 68% of millennials who strongly agree that they have had opportunities at work to learn and grow in the past year plan to be with their organization 1 year from now. So why that's important is the fact that what's at stake is that 33%, only 33% strongly agree that their most recent learning opportunity at work was well worth their time. So again, we have a kind of a similar gap in terms of desire and want relative to need, and a real opportunity as we bridge that. So Casandra, in your own professional and personal experience and advice, help us close that.
Yes, I think that's a really, really important one. And it makes me think of a very brief story of when I first started at Gallup, speaking with not a Gallup manager, this was a different manager, who had went through one of a management course that I happened to, I was around. And he turned to me and he said he never works to develop any of his employees until they've been with the organization for at least 2 years. And the reason he was in that class was because he had terrible team retention.
Okay.
And I was thinking, why do you think all of your people are quitting, friend? It's because you're not investing any time into helping them learn and grow. So I think this particular data point has so many widespread implications. And I also think it goes back to our most recent research. It's the Manager, our book. A lot of this could fall on a really highly skilled manager to set somebody up for success. So your millennials absolutely want opportunities to showcase their skills. You again have the most highly educated generation. So if you're put in a role where you do the same thing repetitively without any opportunity to necessarily showcase a new skill set, build upon what you currently have, sentiment could get pretty negative pretty fast, is what I would say. So I think when I go back to this story of thinking about that manager, he was losing so much talent just by not investing. And think about the turnover cost. Think about the associated cost of hiring new staff. So you as managers, what are you doing to ensure that you're meeting a certain employee need? Another point from our millennial report that came out is the fact that millennials aren't necessarily the best at prioritizing, but they do need help and they want more feedback from their managers. So I think these data points all start to tie together. So we want opportunities to learn and grow, not great at prioritizing, want feedback from our managers. Tying those together, maybe you as a manager can start to schedule regular meetings. You can ask more meaningful questions related to prioritization. And from that, maybe you're starting to hear some developmental goals. You're learning more about this member so that you can set them up for success in the future. I think a lot of it just boils down to talking to your millennials, remembering to have more multidimensional conversations rather than just tactical conversations.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Do you have any, and again, I'm going to just have you draw on some of your own experience.
Sure.
When you think about some of these shifts, so when you talk about that they have such a high appetite to learn and grow,
Yeah.
but the ability to prioritize being challenged. Do you have any
Sure.
theories or any relevance to maybe your own perspective about why is that a feature that we can at least have an informed kind of approach towards? We don't have to prescribe that it has to be something that's challenging every millennial, but if it's a broad theme, what's the storyline behind that in your own opinion?
Yeah. I think part of it is the storyline that millennials, at least your younger millennials, were the newer people in the workforce.
Okay.
So a lot of it, I think, is just the normal age progression is when you're working anywhere. And I think sometimes it's understanding the needs of your employees and cross-generational management.
Yeah.
So maybe if you have one manager who just thinks everybody wants the same thing and isn't able to give proper feedback, maybe that's one thing. The other thing I think that might be impacting the prioritization aspect is the fact that we have such a transparent society right now. We expect feedback in real time. We expect somebody to tell us how we're doing pretty quickly. One of my colleagues who works overseas could text me. I would get it in a couple seconds. So the very fact that the world moves so quickly, we also have that expectation in our workplace. So if nobody's helping us set goals or priorities, it's kind of a miss in a lot of millennials' minds because it's an expectation.
Got it. So when we get inside learning and growing, do you think is there anything unique about is that personal development? Is that professional development? And where do outcomes in terms of gains and performance-driven increase, do they play a factor in that? What do the ingredients actually look like, and what do you think they produce in the expectation of our need to learn and grow?
Yeah, I think it's both personal and professional development, which, again, it's a unique characteristic of this generation because so much personal is intertwined with professional. So some of the data points we already know, this generation is getting married later. They're having fewer children, if any children at all. So when you devote that type of, that component of your life to your job, you are going to have certain expectations to maybe not just grow professionally, like learning a new skill set, but maybe growing in a different level. So I think some of the benefits when we actually devote time to things like that, you're having a more equipped workforce, not just your new staff, but probably those that are impacted by your new staff. So if you're developing your millennials, you probably have people who are going to be able to cross-train other people or have conversations with your future generation, your young Gen Zs who are going to come over and take over everything in a few years. So there's a ton of benefits, but there's also a very high bar because you have a lot of people who are just highly skilled.
Yeah. I think, there's two data points we had Ben Wiegert on a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the performance development shift from performance management approach, and the two data points that just dovetail, maybe intersect is more appropriate with the conversation that you're having right now. Is Ben told us that only 12% of the United States workforce would say that their organization does a great job of onboarding, which the stark reality of that, I think, is just, it's so desolate. And I think the perspective there that you're helping us unpack is the fact that as we start to understand all generations through the perspective of the millennials, is that we ask that question to everybody, not just the new generation of millennial that's entering the workforce. We ask people like myself, Jim Carlson, people who have tenure and age along with that perspective. And quite frankly, in the math, it's the perspective of people like Jim and I or others who are actually looking back and saying, our onboarding wasn't nearly as good as it could have been. It wasn't nearly, and so there's regret on the other side, right? As we speak back. So quite frankly, and it probably is the people, if we look at our engagement results, typically we're most engaged coming in that first year or two. And then if we just let nature take its course, we just give that engagement away. People just naturally become less so. The euphoria wears off, the novelty effect wears off, some of the new experiences wear off. And I think the bridge, if we use the power and the representation of what the millennials represent as standard bearers, helps shift the attention and create an urgency and intensity for what should be happening regardless. What are those uniform motivations that really cut across? And thankfully, there's just a transparency for lots of reasons, I think, about what the millennial generation represents to strike a chord in the right way for things like onboarding. The other one that I think that you're really hitting on too, Casandra, is the fact, another desolate number, but only 18% of the United States workforce would say that people who perform better grow faster in their organization, which again, I don't know how we could do it you would think, again, we would try to be doing it wrong, right? If we were to achieve a number like that, we would actually be trying to accomplish those. So any reaction to that? I think the intersection of those data points really creates a critical mass of understanding, but I'd love to have your reaction to that, and then we'll come back out.
You know, the main data point you sparked in my mind when you were talking was one that always really bothers me. It's the 93% of employees leave their organization when seeking a new opportunity. Mm-hmm. And that's a painful statistic. I think if you're looking back on like the onboarding process, the alignment of clarity and expectations, all of these things that happen in the early stages of a career, we're doing a lot of things wrong, because when people are looking for a new job, they're not looking internally. If we're looking at a 90+ percentage point of people who are leaving for that promotion or lateral transfer, I think we have to address the fact that it's not just millennials for this one. Organizations aren't setting their employees up for success regardless. And I think the transparency issue, the fact that we can see all of this stuff in real time, is just doubling the impact. Mm-hmm. So we're able to see other opportunities, and we're able to jump ship rather than seeing something internal, when hopefully we'd see internal stuff first. And a lot of times we just don't.
Yeah, I think to me, what you really rang the bell on there is the conversation moves from, I'm actually not going to something, I'm actually more leaving something. Yeah, really the statement that's made there. So what I think is really being positioned in all of this is that accountability back within each of us in our current workforce, those of us who can help approximate and create that culture with all the right answers to the right questions. So again, people aren't more motivated to leave something than they are to go somewhere. I think we can shift that understanding and approach. So Casandra, let's build off that momentum. So taking it into our last data point then, 32%, and 32% represents the percentage of millennials who strongly agree that they know the strengths of the people they work with regularly. It's a pretty low number, 32%. Only 32% of millennials strongly agree they know the strengths of the people they work with regularly. Now, let's make sure we're precise in that. We're not talking about Strengths Finder. We're just talking about a reference point of what people can do well, and do they know that? Now, contrasted then, we have an opportunity there, right? Because 39% of non-millennials actually would say they strongly agree that they know the strengths of the people they work with regularly. So I have a reaction to that, but before I dive in with mine, I'd like to yield to you as the expert. It's about a 10% gap in terms of how millennials feel around the familiarity of other strengths relative to non-millennials. And as we think about the integrated workplace, what does that lack of familiarity actually represent? Casandra, what would your response to that?
I think my first initial response is, while we, and I will just put myself in here, while we may not know the strengths as clearly, that doesn't represent the fact that, well, it means we want to know the strengths of our colleagues. Just because we don't know them doesn't mean we're trying to ignore everyone we're working with, or we're trying to neglect that type of role. So here, I think it's an opportunity point, but it's also one probably complicated by the shifting workplace. So I always think of this point as the fact we have so many remote workers. We have so many matrixed teams that don't see each other on a day-to-day basis. So I think of it as the gap between wanting versus perceived ability. And I'm going to use the word perceived here because I think this might be one of those times when certain staff members aren't 100% sure how to better connect with their colleagues, how to have more meaningful conversations, especially today. We're so remarkably busy. People keep their schedules all sorts of full. So I think that there's opportunity. And this is one, again, that I think a manager, a really good manager, can help bridge the gap on. So how do you as a leader within an organization set your employees up to get to know each other, to get to know one another's strengths in both an organic way and a way that makes people feel comfortable trusting their colleagues, opening up, being not just the employee, but also the whole self. So I think it's a sad point, but also a great point that managers can lean into.
Yep, that's terrific. So Casandra, I want to have you, as you integrate your reaction to that, and you keep talking about manager, and we obviously know we've got this groundswell release of It's the Manager, Gallup's latest best book that we've been able to just release within the last 10 days, I think, if my math is correct. So a lot of new release and effect that book is having. But you wrote a blog on the some best practice advice around managing a millennial and an approach and some questions around that. Bring out some of your thought around that blog article, and what would be a couple of keystone insights that really stuck out and provided a center.
Excellent. I wrote that a while ago, Mike, so you're making me dig into my memory.
No, that's okay. I will buy you some time as you think about that.
Oh, no.
More importantly, what you had, what I think is valuable for this group is what are the best questions that we could, coaching questions, if we're sitting across, you referenced earlier about purpose and mission for as a great coaching question, how to strength support purpose and mission as we coach a millennial, maybe probably anybody. But what would be, as you unpack that, are there other key questions that you think really unearth the best of that motivational mindset behind somebody who occupies the millennial generation?
Sure. My favorite question is, and probably will always be, the tell me about a best day at work question. I think the answer to that question tells such a story. And when you're talking to, and it's not just your millennial employees, many of your employees, and you're starting to hear really robust answers around that. You might hear somebody talking about a day they were able to connect a lot of different team members, or a day that they overcame a certain challenge. I think that is a great question to ask some of your younger staff members. I think another one, or tying that question back, will be the futuristic outlook. Okay. So having an employee start to think about the impact they do want to make, starting to think about what a successful career within this organization would look like. I think any of those forward-facing questions rather than past-facing questions are the ones that are going to resonate a lot with your staff, because I think it reflects an investment, and an intentional investment on behalf of the manager. I think it shows that you care about where this person wants to go, and that you want to do something with that information. Now, if you don't do anything with it and you just ask it, and then a year later, this is a pointless conversation, you're probably going to start to disengage your millennials. But when you ask, I think, the multidimensional questions like that aren't just tactical, I think that's when you can really develop a strong relationship with a generation that perhaps isn't as devoted to the traditional workspace.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I like that. I like that forward-facing and that accountability around multi-dimensional. That if this is just a boilerplate, check off the box exchange, which isn't great for anybody, but less tolerance around it from the perspective of millennial, I think that helps us inform what that conversation could look like. Jim, what are you thinking about right now?
Yeah, I do want to bring in the fact as we think about this too. There's when you were, Casandra, you're talking a little bit about some of the pressures to stay and pressures to go in the workplace, and there is an X factor in this, not Gen X, because we're forgotten, but there is I had to throw that in. There's an X factor of social pressure, that the increased of social media and social awareness, where there's almost a competition now to see who can post the best workplace environment on LinkedIn or on Facebook. And even here at Gallup, we've done a lot of work on, hey, this is a great place to work. Let's let people know it's a great place to work. We think about the advent of places like Glassdoor, where the open economy we're openly rating places. And do you really want to work for a place that it's a 2.7 on Glassdoor, right? And so even though I might have a great job, and I might have a great manager, I may feel some social pressure, especially if my friends and those I graduated with or whatever are all doing more exciting things because they're posting their adventures on Facebook, right? And so I also want to bring that up a little bit, because this is an area I recruit in, and man, it is sometimes we talk about having, and you have to have all these things right in the workplace, but we're also competing against peer pressure in social media to work for the coolest company or to be in the greatest place. And so that always creates a grass is greener effect. I think we underestimate the power of that sometimes. I don't know. What do you think, Casandra?
No, I think you're 100% right. And I work a lot in higher education with a lot of our young people, and I love working with them. We recently had a study come out, Gallup with Bates College. And one of the things that came out in that study was the disconnect between students who are looking for like a high purpose career and actually finding one. I think it's figuring out what a high purpose career looks like, in addition to the fancy flashy careers. Like I work at like the Googles and the Facebooks and the pretty jobs. So helping a lot of young people find jobs that they can be really, really proud of that aren't just status careers. And I think with having like the Glassdoors of the world and having this really competitive environment, it's a challenge. And it's a unique challenge that I think our coaching community could find opportunity in to help a lot of young people find that.
No, that's awesome. So Casandra, as we come in for a landing on this and
Sure.
we think about our audience specifically, what would be your strongest point of encouragement, the strongest point of value that coaches could decisively step in and really contribute to this workplace that's going to be occupied motivationally and physically by millennials, right? If it's 70% next year, what's the best contribution they can make?
Yeah, great question. I think that it probably, in my mind, the thing is, this isn't a passing phase. Like millennials aren't something that are going to disappear. This is the fabric of the workforce starting to shift. So if you are coaching an organization or working with an organization who are still labeling young people as a negative, as having this negative connotation, saying millennials ruined this, which is one of my favorite things to Google because we ruin everything. So if they decide that this is a generation who's just built for all of these negative connotations, it's not that. This is a generation that has some fundamental changes to it. So again, we know that when we start to look at, people in 1963 of our age were legitimately had more children, were married, had higher religious affiliations than we currently do at the same age today. So we see some real shifts, but a lot of it is going to be societal shifts versus just generational shifts. Things aren't going to change back to 1920, 1930. The world's already changed too much. So I think a lot of it is embracing the fact that we have a lot to learn from this highly educated generation, but also understanding that in a few years, it's not just us. It's Gen Z. It's the tech native generation who is going to come in knowing how to run things in a really new and interesting way. So I think it is starting to pull away all those negative stereotypes, because there are negatives attached to everybody, regardless of generation, and start to think about how we can all work together, how we can understand one another, and how you can build stronger teams and stronger companies.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I want to really press into that because Casandra, as we get into, I know one of the motivations you and I had in this conversation is to just break through as many myths as we possibly could. But quite frankly, critique those myths were to the point where they were exposed as being false. But what are the things that are true also? So if I delineate this question, here's what I'm going to ask. We have a stereotype or a profile or an image that's been delivered to us about who a millennial is. In research or your own experience or perspective, where is that profile of a millennial closest to being true? Where is it furthest away from being true, or where is it most false? What would be your reaction to helping us see really clearly what that person is, who that person is through the generation that they occupy?
All right, you cut out temporarily. Do you say where we're furthest away from the myths? And
where is it most true? Where is it the biggest truth? Where is it the biggest lie? When we think
biggest truth, biggest lie.
Yeah,
biggest truth. I think the first thing I think of when I think of the ridiculous millennial stuff is like, millennials love avocado toast, and they're making like chain restaurants go away. That's true. Avocado toast is delicious. I don't care. That's a fine statistic. So we can keep that one. You can start to get used to it all of the other generations. We'll have little shifts that are going to change. As consumers, we're not as connected to company messaging. It's really hard to get brand loyalty with a millennial. So there's a true. The false is probably a lot of the negative connotations just associated with youth. I mean, the phrase like kids these days wasn't invented purely regarding millennials. You're going to see it across generation related to anybody. Like, I'm sure my generation will be saying this in 10 years about the kids these days. So I think a lot of the negative stereotypes are really associated with just the aging process and maybe a lack of understanding and the increased transparency. So you can see a lot of our behaviors in real time, whereas my grandfather was lucky enough that his bad behavior at any point wasn't broadcast to a million people like it could have been. So we have the luxury of knowing that our behaviors are seen in real time. So I think a lot of the negative stereotypes are just connected to some of the things you learn when you get older. The true ones, we are legitimately not going to stay with your companies if probably the benefit isn't there for us. So how are you making your value proposition known? The true ones, we're so incredibly devoted when you do.
Yeah.
So we're willing to do a whole lot. We're willing to mix our personal life. We're willing to give up weekends or do something a little extra when you do help us see the value or see the mission.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to unpack, but there's a lot of really positive attributes of an entire generation that's about to take over the entire workforce.
No, I completely agree. And I think there's so many lessons that even just the conversation has helped us become more exposed to and aware of, I think, it's what truly matters in that intersection of the world and the workplace. And I love just the synthesis of so much of our report, right? You brought it out perfectly when we talk about not having children or delaying the decision to have kids if they have kids at all, delaying the decision to get married if they get married at all. Home ownership is down.
Yep.
Formal religious affiliation is down. Formal political affiliation is down. Highest educated generation, most student debt, and the convergence of all those factors really come together. And so sometimes when I step back and just try to get a broad picture of what's really the difference, I think it's the most mobile generation that we've ever been able to study based on where they're at and all of the convergence of these factors. So for some of us, and some of this has to do with career life cycle, right? We have some of those formal affiliations established and commitments. They give us a barrier that we have to consider if we were to say yes to a new opportunity.
Sure.
I think in the dynamic of the millennial generation, those barriers are lower if they exist at all. And I think we have to tap into more core central engagement and strengths oriented motivators. Otherwise, you have more choices and you can say yes to more things. And you've seen more things, right? Because it's the most equitable generation that we have on record as well. So I think those are great conversations because ultimately what they do is they get us all to acknowledge the things that truly, genuinely matter. Millennials have been great standard bearers, but at the core, I think it's a language and a motivation that we all connect to. So, thank you, Casandra, on behalf of Jim and I, bringing that world to us. Jim, is there any conversation from the chat room or from yourself that we need to bring into?
Yeah, I think one more quick question. We could probably spend a whole hour on this. So, Casandra, you'll have to do it in like 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think this is the elephant in the room, right? How do we respond to the accusation that millennials are impatient and don't want to put in the work, just expecting, demanding, promote me or leave? That's from Rachel. How would you respond to that?
As somebody who's worked with a lot of multi-generational people, and I've done a lot of interviewing for Gallup. My own anecdotal experience says that all of the generations are doing that, especially like new hires. I hear that from like boomers and traditionalists, but we get really angry when it's a young person that wants a promotion early rather than somebody who has a few years on them. I think this goes back to the learn and grow. So what it looks like, how we're perceiving somebody saying, I want an opportunity. Maybe it sounds like I want a promotion, but maybe that's a really good opportunity to talk to them about what opportunities they should take. So I think of this as a nice time, as whoever you're talking to figure out what type of opportunities you should take, what a promotion actually looks like. There is a lot of transparency, so status probably matters in a lot of people's minds. But this just goes back to the feedback from managers, I would say. Having better conversations with your staff to sidestep any negativity associated with it.
We are seeing an enormous amount of title inflation that's going on where, I got a note via LinkedIn from somebody who said, hey, we talked 3 years ago. And in that time I worked in the help desk. I was a director and now I am the CIO of and I'm like, whoa. Like, and so there is some of that kind of, I'm seeing some of that going on to kind of in response to this idea of kind of, in that. By the way, when I was younger, they would say those kids to me, we wanted computers. We were the first generation that expected a computer when we came to work, right? It was one of those like, and today you think, well, of course you would, but that was new. Like,
Sure.
we also expected internet access at work. Like today you would think, wow, how archaic is that?
Yeah.
Well, in the 90s, you didn't, there were some organizations that were afraid if you had access to the internet, you would goof around all day by, surfing the web. There's probably still some organizations that feel that way today, right? And so
Sure there are.
I say those things to say that I want to be really, really careful that we don't so focus in on this that we begin to make assumptions about things that aren't true. As coaches, we really need it really comes down to an individual by individual. You can see some trends. Right. You can kind of notice some things, and there's things that are going on and some percentages that are changing, but it really is about the individual, right, Casandra?
Perfect.
It's really about diving in. What are your talents and what are you bringing to the workplace? And if I manage the millennials to the millennial idea, it's going to be a disaster. I still have to manage on an individual basis and make sure everybody has their needs. Any other final thoughts, guys?
Casandra, parting shots? Anything
on behalf of the millennials, I love that, Jim. I think you said that beautiful. Manage them to who they are versus the stereotype that we've created in society.
Yeah,
right on.
Yeah, Casandra, I just can't get past that. To me, you said it right out of the gate, and you reinforced it at every point along the way. But that notion of millennials being consumers of the global marketplace and workplace, that's such a signature takeaway, and I think it orients everything really well. So, Casandra, thank you so much for just walking us through this so brilliantly, personally and professionally. A lot in our audience are going to recognize you from the vast number of ASC courses that you've taught, and then the vast number of people that you've coached as a result of those courses and so many other touch points. So, thanks for your time and the way you really involved yourself in this particular report and bringing it to life for all of us.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Jim?
Well, with that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available for you at the Gallup Strengths Center. If you wanted to get this report, go to Gallup.com, search How Millennials Want to Work and Live. Pretty easy to find from there. The URL is a little complicated, but available for you, as well as a lot of other articles we've written about the millennials and all the generations that are out there. So if you want to take a look at that, just head out to news.gallup.com, use our search. It's pretty fantastic. If you've got any questions, maybe we didn't answer, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, or really, we have a bunch of courses that are going to be available for you, especially if you're listening to this late 2019, late 2020. We're going to have some amazing courses available for you. Courses.gallup.com to get access to those. And don't forget, the 2019 summit is coming. It's like in 10 days. Speaking of 10 days, Mike, it's coming up. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there. If you are there, make sure you find me. If you're not, you might want to think about planning for 2020. You can get more information, CliftonStrengthsSummit.com. Join us in our Facebook group as well if you want to do that, which is about 13,000 of you out there in that group, which is super cool. Head out to facebook.com/groups with an S/called-to-coach. I want to thank you for joining us today, and hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, share it. We'd love to have you just put that out there, and we'd love others to consume this as well. Thanks for coming out if you're listening live, and with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.